The drifter didn't remember the town, but the town seemed to remember him. He rode in just before dusk, dust trailing his horse like a ghost unwilling to let go. The sign at the edge of the settlement read, Brennan's Crossing, and the name meant nothing. Most names didn't anymore. He'd lost count of the towns, the faces, the roads that all looked the same under the same relentless sun. His name was Caleb Marsh, though he hadn't said it aloud in weeks. Out here, names were currencies spent too easily. Better to be nobody. Safer. The main street was quiet, lined with weathered storefronts, and a saloon that leaned slightly to the left as if tired of standing. A few people watched him pass slow turns of the head, eyes that lingered a second too long. He was used to that. Strangers always drew attention, especially ones who looked like they'd ridden through hell and decided to keep going. Caleb dismounted outside the livery stable, his boots hitting the dirt with a dull thud. The horse snorted, shaking its mane. He patted its neck, murmuring something low, then turned toward the stable doors. That's when he saw the boy. He was small, maybe 10 or 11, standing just inside the shadow of the barn. Thin arms, dirt-smudged face, dark hair that fell into eyes too old for his age. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. Caleb hesitated. Something about the way the boy looked at him like recognition, like grief made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't name. "You need something, kid?" Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. The boy stepped forward, slowly, as if testing whether Caleb was real. His hands were clenched at his sides, trembling slightly. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're him." Caleb frowned. "Don't know what you're talking about." "You are." The boy's voice cracked. "You're Caleb Marsh." The name, spoken aloud, felt like a stone dropped into still water. Caleb's hand drifted instinctively toward his belt, though there was no threat here. Just a boy. Just a name. "Who told you that?" "My papa." The boy's eyes were wet now, glinting in the fading light. Before he died, Caleb felt something cold settle in his gut. He didn't know this boy. Didn't know any boy. He'd made sure of that. No roots. No ties. Nothing that could pull him back into a past he'd buried under years of movement and silence. "Kid, I don't know your father. I don't know you." "Yes, you do." The boy's voice rose, desperate now, pleading. "You saved him once. A long time ago. He told me. He said if anything ever happened, I should find you. He said you were the only one who'd understand." "Understand what?" The boy swallowed hard, his small chest rising and falling with the effort of keeping himself together. "He said his last words were your name. He said you'd come." Caleb stared at him, searching for something, a memory, a flash, anything. But there was nothing. Just a boy with tears on his face and a story that didn't fit. "I don't," Caleb started, but the boy cut him off. "Please." His voice broke completely now. "Please. I don't have anyone else." The silence stretched between them, heavy and impossible. Caleb felt the weight of it pressing down on his shoulders, the same weight he'd been running from for years. He wanted to turn, to mount his horse, and ride out before the sun set, but something held him there. Maybe it was the boy's eyes, maybe it was the name, or maybe it was the scar. The boy had lifted his sleeve, just slightly, revealing a jagged mark running along his forearm. Old, faded, but unmistakable. The kind of scar you got from barbed wire, or a blade, or something worse. Caleb's breath caught, because he'd seen that scar before. Not on this boy. On someone else. Someone from a life he'd tried to forget. The boy saw the recognition flicker across Caleb's face. His expression shifted hope, fragile and desperate. "You remember," the boy whispered. Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't. Something he'd spent years keeping locked away. A voice, a face, a moment in the dark, when everything had gone wrong. "What's your name?" Caleb's voice was hoarse now. "Ethan." The boy's chin lifted slightly, as if the name gave him strength. "Ethan Cole." Cole. The name hit like a fist to the chest. Caleb closed his eyes. Just for a second, and let the memory come. The fire, the screaming, the night it all fell apart. Caleb remembered now. 15 years ago, maybe more. He'd been younger then, angrier, running with a crew that lived on the edges of the law. They weren't outlaws, not really, just men who did what they had to do to survive. And sometimes that meant taking jobs no one else would touch. One of those men had been Samuel Cole. Sam had been quiet, steady, the kind of man who didn't talk much but always showed up when it mattered. He had a scar on his arm from a knife fight he never talked about, and a way of looking at the horizon like he was searching for something he'd never find. They'd ridden together for 2 years. Then came the job in Silver Ridge. It was supposed to be simple: guard a shipment, get paid, move on. But nothing was ever simple. The gang that hit them came fast and hard, and in the chaos, Sam had taken a bullet meant for Caleb. Went down in the dirt, blood spreading across his shirt like spilled ink. Caleb had stayed, held pressure on the wound, kept him breathing long enough for a doctor to arrive. And when it was over, when Sam was stitched up and conscious, he'd looked at Caleb with eyes full of something Caleb couldn't name. "You didn't have to do that," Sam had whispered. "Yeah, I did." Sam had smiled faintly. "Guess I owe you my life, then. Don't owe me anything." But Sam had disagreed. He'd left the crew after that, said he was going to settle down, start over. Said he had a boy to think about now, a son. Caleb had never seen him again, until now. Ethan stood in the barn, watching Caleb's face as the memories settled. The boy's hands were still trembling, but his eyes were steady. "He talked about you," Ethan said quietly. "Not a lot, but enough. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew." Caleb shook his head slowly. "Your father had me confused with someone else." "No." Ethan's voice was firm now, stronger. "He didn't. He said you saved his life. And he said if anything happened to him, you'd do the same for me." "What happened to him?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "He was killed 3 weeks ago." The words landed heavy. Caleb felt them settle in his chest, cold and sharp. "How?" "Men came to our ranch. 4 of them. They said Papa owed them money. He said he didn't. They didn't care." Ethan's voice wavered, but he kept going. "They shot him, right in front of me. And when he was dying, he told me to run. He told me to find you." Caleb's fists clenched. "Why didn't you go to the law?" "Because the law won't help." Ethan's eyes hardened, and for a moment, he looked far older than his years. "The sheriff here is one of them, or at least he doesn't care. Papa knew that. That's why he told me to find you." Caleb turned away, running a hand through his hair. This wasn't his fight. This wasn't his town. He didn't owe anyone anything, not even a ghost from his past. But the boy's eyes stayed on him, burning with the kind of desperate hope that could break a man if he let it. "I can't help you," Caleb said finally. "Yes, you can. I don't even know who killed him." "I do." Ethan stepped closer. "Their leader's name is Garrett Hale. He runs everything in this town. The saloon, the land office, half the ranches. Papa wouldn't sell to him, so Hale took it anyway." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And you think I can walk in there and make that right?" "I think you're the only one who would even try." The silence between them stretched long and heavy. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the stable doors. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Caleb looked at the boy, this small, fragile thing holding on to the last thread of hope he had left. And he thought about Sam, about the way he'd smiled when he said he had a son to think about now, about the way he'd looked at Caleb like he'd given him something worth living for. "Where are you staying?" Caleb asked quietly. "Nowhere. I've been sleeping in the church." Caleb cursed under his breath. He wanted to walk away. He wanted to mount his horse and ride until this town was a memory and this boy was someone else's problem. But he couldn't, because Sam had saved something in him once too. And maybe this was the price. "You eat today?" Ethan shook his head. Caleb sighed, the weight of the decision settling over him like a coat he couldn't take off. "Come on. We'll get you something." Ethan's eyes lit up not with joy, but with relief so profound it almost hurt to look at. As they stepped out of the barn, the streets had emptied. The sun was gone now, and the town felt different in the dark, smaller, meaner, like it was holding its breath. Caleb glanced down at the boy walking beside him, this small ghost of a man he'd once called a friend. "You understand what you're asking me to do, right?" Ethan nodded. "I'm asking you to make them pay. It's not that simple." "I know." Ethan's voice was quiet but steady. "But you're here, and that's more than anyone else has done." Caleb didn't answer, because the boy was right, and because he'd already made his choice. They ate in silence at the edge of the saloon, bread, dried meat, water. Caleb kept his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. Old habits. Ethan ate slowly, like he wasn't sure when the next meal would come. Caleb watched him, seeing Sam in the shape of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders. The resemblance was unmistakable now. "Tell me about Hale," Caleb said quietly. Ethan swallowed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "He came here 5 years ago, bought the saloon first, then started buying land. Anyone who wouldn't sell had accidents, fires, livestock poisoned. Some people just disappeared, and the law did nothing. The law works for him." Ethan's voice was flat, resigned. "Sheriff Dorsey gets paid to look the other way. Everyone knows it. No one says it." Caleb leaned back, his jaw tight. "How many men does Hale have?" 6, maybe 7. They're always at the saloon. They don't hide. They don't have to. And you're sure it was Hale who killed your father?" "I saw him." Ethan's eyes went dark, distant. He stood there and watched while his men did it, and when Papa was on the ground, Hale leaned down and told him he should have taken the offer. Caleb's hands curled into fists. He'd seen men like Hale before, men who took because they could, who built empires on fear and blood. They were everywhere out here, filling the spaces the law couldn't reach. But that didn't make it right. "You think you can take him?" Ethan asked, his voice small. Caleb didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure. He'd been in fights before, plenty of them, but he wasn't the man he used to be. He was older now, slower, carrying too many scars and not enough reasons to keep fighting. But then he looked at the boy, and he thought about Sam. "I don't know," Caleb said honestly, "but I'll try." Ethan nodded, and for the first time since they'd met, something like trust flickered in his eyes. The door to the saloon swung open. Caleb saw them before they saw him. 3 men, walking with the kind of swagger that came from knowing no one would stop them. They were loud, drunk, laughing about something Caleb couldn't hear. Ethan went rigid beside him. "That's them," he whispered. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his belt, fingers brushing the handle of his revolver. He didn't draw. Not yet. The men stopped at the bar, ordering whiskey, still laughing. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, glanced toward the corner where Caleb and Ethan sat. His laughter died. "Well, hell," the man said, his voice carrying across the room. "Look what we got here." The other 2 turned. Caleb met their eyes, keeping his expression neutral. The scarred man walked toward them, slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze flicking between Caleb and Ethan. "You're new," the man said. "Just passing through," Caleb replied evenly. "That right?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And the boy?" "None of your business." The man laughed a cold, humorless sound. "See, that's where you're wrong, stranger. Everything in this town is my business. Or at least, it's Mr. Hale's business. And he don't like strangers poking around where they don't belong." Caleb didn't move. "We're just eating." "Uh-huh." The man leaned closer, his voice dropping. "That boy there, he's been causing trouble, running his mouth about things that don't concern him. Mr. Hale's been looking for him." Ethan shrank back, fear flashing across his face. Caleb shifted, just slightly, putting himself between the man and the boy. "He's with me now." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's supposed to mean something. It means you walk away." For a moment, the saloon went quiet. The other 2 men at the bar had stopped talking, their hands drifting toward their belts. The bartender had disappeared into the back. The scarred man studied Caleb, weighing him. Then he smiled, slow and dangerous. You got no idea what you just stepped into, do you? Caleb's voice was quiet, steady. I know enough. The man straightened, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. Mr. Hale's gonna want to meet you. Real soon. I'm not hard to find. The man laughed again, then turned and walked back to his companions. They left together, the door swinging shut behind them with a creak that sounded like a warning. Caleb exhaled slowly, his hand still on his revolver. Ethan was shaking. They'll come back. I know. They'll bring more men, probably. Then we should leave. Right now. Before. No. Caleb's voice was firm. If we run, they'll hunt you down. And next time, I won't be there. Ethan stared at him, tears welling in his eyes. I don't want you to die because of me. Caleb looked at the boy, this small, terrified thing who'd already lost everything. Your father saved my life once, Caleb said quietly. I owe him this. But no buts. Caleb stood, dropping a few coins on the table. Come on, we're not staying here. They left the saloon and walked quickly through the darkened streets, Caleb's eyes scanning every shadow, every doorway. The town felt like it was closing in around them, the air thick with the promise of violence. When they reached the church, Caleb checked the doors, the windows, the bell tower. It wasn't much, but it was defensible. Ethan sat on one of the pews, his head in his hands. They're going to come tonight, aren't they? He whispered. Caleb didn't answer, because they both already knew. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the church doors, and somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed through the dark. They waited in the silence of the church, the only light coming from a single candle burning on the altar. Caleb sat near the door, his revolver resting on his knee, his eyes trained on the darkness outside. Ethan was curled up on a pew, trying to sleep but failing. Every creak, every gust of wind made him flinch. You should rest, Caleb said quietly. I can't. Caleb glanced at him. The boy looked so small, so fragile, like a breath of wind could blow him away. It reminded Caleb of himself once years ago, before he'd learned to harden himself against the world. Tell me about your father, Caleb said. Ethan lifted his head, surprised. Why? Because I want to know. Ethan hesitated, then sat up slowly. His voice was soft when he spoke. He was good. He worked hard. He never hurt anyone. He just wanted to keep the ranch and raise me right. Sounds like a good man. He was. Ethan's voice cracked. He didn't deserve what happened. Caleb nodded. No, he didn't. He talked about you sometimes. Ethan continued. Not a lot, but when he did, it was always different, like you were someone special. Caleb frowned. I wasn't. I was just there. That's what made you special. Ethan's eyes were wet again, but he didn't look away. You stayed when no one else would have. You saved his life, and because of that, I gotta have him for 10 more years. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard living. I didn't do anything anyone else wouldn't have done, Caleb said quietly. That's not true, Ethan whispered. Most people would have run, but you didn't. And now you're here, even though you don't have to be, even though it might get you killed. Caleb didn't answer, because the boy was right, and there was nothing to say that would make it less true. They sat in silence for a while, the candle flickering between them. Can I ask you something? Ethan's voice was hesitant. Go ahead. Why did you leave? After you saved him, I mean. Why didn't you stay? Caleb exhaled slowly. Because I didn't belong anywhere. Still don't. Papa said you were running from something. Maybe I was. What? Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. Myself. Ethan frowned, not understanding. Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've done things I'm not proud of, kid. Things I can't take back. And for a long time I thought if I just kept moving I could leave them behind. But they followed me anyway. So I stopped trying to outrun them and just existed, one town to the next. No past, no future, just now. That sounds lonely. It is. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Papa used to say that running from yourself is the hardest kind of running, because no matter how fast you go, you're always right there. Caleb smiled faintly. Your father was a smart man. He was. Ethan wiped his eyes. I miss him. I know. Do you think he knew that I'd find you? Caleb thought about that, about Sam lying in the dirt, bleeding out, using his last breath to give his son a name, a lifeline. Yeah, Caleb said quietly. I think he knew. Ethan nodded, and for the first time since they'd met, something like peace settled over his face. The hoofbeats came just after midnight. Caleb was on his feet instantly, revolver in hand. Ethan sat up, his eyes wide with fear. Stay down, Caleb ordered. The boy obeyed, dropping to the floor behind the pew. Caleb moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Outside, 6 men on horseback had gathered in the street. In the center, a tall man with silver hair and a long coat sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the church. Garrett Hale. Caleb recognized him from the way the others deferred to him, the way they waited for his signal. Hale's voice rang out clear and cold. I know you're in there, stranger, and I know you've got the boy. Caleb didn't answer. You're making a mistake, Hale continued. That boy's father stole from me. He owes a debt, and debts get paid one way or another. He didn't steal anything. Ethan's voice broke through the silence, desperate and furious. Ethan. Quiet, Caleb hissed, but it was too late. Hale had heard. There you are, Hale said, his voice almost gentle. Come on out, boy. We can settle this peacefully. Ethan's hands were shaking. He's lying. I know. Then what do we do? Caleb looked down at the boy, then back at the men outside. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a building with no back exit, but he'd been in worse situations. We make them think twice, Caleb said. He stepped to the door, threw it open, and stood in the threshold visible, unflinching, his revolver at his side. Hale's eyes locked onto him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Hale smiled. You've got spine. I'll give you that. But spine won't stop a bullet. Neither will talk, Caleb replied evenly. Hale's smile faded. Last chance. Send the boy out, and you can ride away. No one has to die tonight. Except him, Caleb said. The boy's debt is his father's debt. That's how it works. Not anymore. Hale's expression darkened. Then you'll die for nothing. Maybe. Caleb's hand moved to his revolver. Or maybe you will. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The men behind Hale shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Then Hale laughed soft and cold. You're a fool, probably. Hale raised his hand, and his men began to dismount. Caleb stepped back into the church and shut the door. They're coming, Ethan whispered. Yeah, what do we do? Caleb checked his revolver, then looked at the boy. We fight. The first shot shattered the church window. Caleb dove behind a pew, pulling Ethan down with him. Glass rained across the floor, glittering in the candlelight. Outside, men shouted, boots thudding against the dirt as they spread out. Stay low, Caleb said. Ethan nodded, his face pale but determined. Caleb moved to the side window, staying below the sill. He could hear them circling the building, testing for weak points. They were cautious now, no longer assuming this would be easy. Good. He waited, breath steady, finger resting on the trigger. Then, a shadow passed the window, and Caleb fired. The shot rang out like thunder. A man screamed, and the shadow dropped. The response was immediate. Gunfire erupted from all sides, bullets tearing through the wooden walls, splintering the pews. Caleb ducked, moving low and fast, returning fire when he had a clear shot. 1 man down. 5 to go. The shooting paused. Caleb used the silence to reload, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Ethan, you okay? Yeah. The boy's voice was shaking, but he was unhurt. Good. Stay behind me, no matter what. Okay. Another volley of shots. Caleb fired back, aiming for movement, for sound. Another cry of pain. Another body hitting the ground. 4 left. Then the door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, guns blazing. Caleb dropped one with a single shot, but the second kept coming. They collided, crashing into a pew. The man swung wildly, his fist connecting with Caleb's jaw. Stars burst across his vision, but he didn't let go of his gun. He shoved the barrel into the man's ribs and pulled the trigger. The man went limp, sliding to the floor. Caleb staggered to his feet, blood dripping from a split lip. His head rang, but he stayed upright. 3 left. Outside, Hale's voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Fall back! The gunfire stopped. Caleb moved to the broken door, staying in the shadows. He could see Hale standing in the street, alone now, his remaining men flanking him at a distance. Hale's coat was dusty, his expression cold and calculating. You're good, he said. Better than I expected. But you're out of bullets. Caleb said nothing, because Hale was right. I'll make you the same offer I made your friend, Hale continued. Walk away. Leave the boy, and I'll let you live. No, Hale sighed, almost weary. Then I'll kill you both. You'll try. Hale's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could draw, a shot rang out from the edge of the street. Hale staggered, blood blooming across his shoulder. He spun, eyes wide with shock, and there, standing in the doorway of the saloon, was the bartender, a rifle in his hands, his face grim. Enough, the bartender said. This ends now. Other doors opened. More townspeople emerged, some holding rifles, others clubs, pitchforks, whatever they could find. They moved slowly, but together, forming a loose circle around Hale and his men. Hale looked around, disbelief flickering across his face. You fools. You're going to die for this. Maybe, the bartender said, but so are you. Hale's remaining men exchanged glances, then dropped their guns and raised their hands. They knew when they were beaten. Hale stood alone, blood seeping through his coat, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Caleb stepped out of the church, his empty revolver still in his hand. Your men are done. Your power's broken. And if you're smart, you'll leave before they change their minds and finish what I started. For a long moment, Hale just stared at him. Then he laughed, bitter and hollow. You think you've won? You've just painted a target on your back. Wouldn't be the first time. Hale's smile faded. He turned and walked toward his horse, slow and stiff, one hand pressed to his wounded shoulder. His men followed, dejected and silent. Caleb watched them ride out, disappearing into the darkness beyond the edge of town. Then he turned to the townspeople, who were still standing there, uncertain. The bartender stepped forward. We should have done this a long time ago. Caleb nodded. Better late than never. You're bleeding. Caleb touched his lip, wincing. I've had worse. The bartender smiled faintly. You planning to stay? Caleb glanced back at the church, where Ethan stood in the doorway, watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. For a while, Caleb said. 3 days later, Caleb stood at the edge of Sam's grave, a simple marker carved with his name and the dates that framed his life. Ethan stood beside him, holding a handful of wildflowers. He would have liked knowing you came, Ethan said quietly. Caleb nodded. He was a good man. He said the same about you. Caleb smiled faintly. He was wrong. No, he wasn't. Ethan placed the flowers on the grave, then stepped back. You saved me, just like you saved him. I didn't do it alone. The town helped. But you started it. Ethan looked up at him, his eyes clear and steady. You gave them the courage to stand up. Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there, the wind tugging at his coat, the sun warm on his face. What will you do now? Ethan asked. Caleb thought about it, about the road stretching out ahead of him, endless and empty, about the towns he'd never stay in, the faces he'd never remember. Then he looked down at the boy. I thought I might stick around, Caleb said, if that's all right with you. Ethan's face lit up real joy, unguarded and pure. Really? Yeah. Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Someone's got to make sure you don't get into trouble. Ethan laughed, a sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. They walked back toward town together, side by side, the past heavy behind them but the future open ahead. And for the first time in years, Caleb Marsh didn't feel like he was running anymore. He felt like he was home. Years later, people in Brennan's Crossing would tell the story of the drifter who came to town with nothing but a name and a debt to a dead man. They'd talk about the night he stood alone against Garrett Hale's men, how he sparked the fire that burned away the fear that had gripped the town for years. But the story they told most was about the boy, the one who'd lost everything and found a father in a stranger who couldn't even remember him at first. Ethan Cole grew up strong and steady, raised by a man who taught him that courage wasn't about never being afraid, it was about standing up anyway. And Caleb Marsh, the drifter who'd spent his life running from himself, finally found the one thing that made him stop, a reason to stay.